Welcome to the third episode of the Becoming Conscious podcast. I'm your host, Ethan, and today we're going to be talking about how to live an alternative lifestyle and be very intentional and conscious with the way that you live your life in order to give yourself the freedom to travel in your younger years rather than waiting to do it until the end. So this is a podcast about challenging the status quo and challenging the norms that our culture surrounds us with. I have a few very special guests on the show today. Their names are Trent and Allie, and they are a few content creators online who spread the word about van life and share their own personal experiences through a series of vlogs that they post on YouTube very frequently. You can find them on both YouTube and Instagram at Trent and Allie, and I will be putting their links in the show notes at becomeconscious.org/BC3. So enjoy the show. Okay, so welcome to the podcast. I just want to start out. Thank you guys for coming on the podcast. It's a first interview, so this will be interesting. Why don't you guys just explain like who you are, where you're from, and like kind of the lifestyle that you're living right now?
Sure, Ethan, thanks for having us. So we're Trent and Allie. We travel around the country. We actually live in a van that we have fully converted ourselves and document our adventures and outdoor lifestyle on YouTube and other social media platforms, Instagram, and just try to share our lives with others and inspire others to be active and live in a minimalistic lifestyle as well.
Awesome. So there's kind of been a big hype around like van life recently and just going mobile. And people often think like there's kind of a lot of stereotypes I found that come along with van lifing. People think you just have to sacrifice so much, and sometimes I think it gets exaggerated a little bit. How people think that you have to sacrifice so much that it's not even like comfortable or fun at all. So what's your guys' experience with that and like some of the upsides and downsides that you found with van life?
So we're probably like a perfect example of not sacrificing much as far as reducing down to living in a van. We have like a lot of amenities that a lot of people in vans either can't support or they don't have room for. We have like a full espresso maker. I mean, we have our mountain bikes inside. There's just a lot of things that we incorporated into the build that most people living in a van are like almost camping or like roughing it. And that's what a lot of people expect is like, oh, you're just some dirty guy that never showers and you're, parking down by the river and blah, blah, blah. We built like a full shower, a bathroom, everything into our van. So I mean, we have like a tiny house on wheels, so we're like I said, a perfect example of somebody that didn't have to cut back and minimalize as much as some people think you have to in order to live van life.
I would say it's all about prioritizing kind of what you want the van to be for you. Everybody is in a van for a different reason. For us, we prioritize adventuring outside, mountain biking, so we have a huge kind of gear garage under our bed to hold all of our toys. And then coffee is another big one, showering is a big one. So we have, a few priorities that we made sure to include, and then everything else we cut back on and are able to live pretty freely without.
A few things came to mind. One question I had was, why did you choose like to live in a van rather than like, I don't know, a motorhome or like a mini bus or something? Like I've seen many different ways of doing it. Like why did you guys choose the van?
So there's a handful of reasons. Size is like one of the biggest ones. If you have like a full-on motorhome or like even the short buses or regular school buses that are converted into like a living space, they're huge. People know you're living in them 9 times out of 10. You can't just like roll into a neighborhood and stealth camp if you've got a huge bus or a motorhome. A lot of cities and states have laws against parking a motorhome on the street because that's the only way they can stop people from living in them on the street. Whereas a van, you look like a work van to most people, so you can park in some locations, and as long as you don't draw a lot of attention, you can stay there for a few days and people aren't going to bother you. Whereas you don't really get those luxuries, or you can't get away with that with, a big bus or a motorhome.
There's also like the stuff that we like to do that requires not off-roading, I would say, but a little bit more maneuverability than you could get out of a school bus or a motorhome. Like, we take this van on gravel and dirt roads in the backcountry, up some sketchy mountain passes, and it does great. And that's just not something that we'd be able to do necessarily in a school bus. Even really in a city, navigating a school bus or a huge RV in downtown Portland or Seattle is a lot more difficult than we were willing to take on.
Can be a real pain.
Yeah.
Also, gas mileage is huge. Some of the buses will get 10 or maybe 12 miles to the gallon, but you look at like a full-size motorhome or like a full-size school bus, and they're usually getting sub 10 miles per gallon, and that's just like less than half of what we get in our vans. Like, I just couldn't do that.
It's funny though, like, the more storage spaces I feel like you create in a van, the more you're just going to end up filling those spaces. And so for us, if we had an RV or a motorhome or a school bus, we would just fill that whole vehicle with stuff, where we can actually get away with just having this smaller van and taking everything we need with it.
Yeah.
It's been nice.
We could minimalize more, but we definitely have a small amount of things compared to people who live in a house or an apartment.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of resonate with that idea. Like what you just said, Allie, how like people just kind of fill the spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if you've heard of like the Minimalists, Joshua Fields Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus. Well, basically, they talk about how if someone like gets a new apartment or something, they just like the first thing they do is they try to get furniture for it or like a TV, and they just feel like they need to fill that space.
Definitely.
So I definitely think living in a smaller space, you just don't have that urge to buy so much stuff to decorate it and to just fill it in.
Yeah, I mean, it even translates into like, even in the van, we actually just bought a new storage shelf, and it's a little bit smaller than the shelf that we had originally in our shower. So we had to like go through and pick out things that we decided we didn't actually need to take with us. And we were able to basically cut all of our toiletries in half, which we already thought we weren't taking that much, but then we had to force everything into a smaller shelving unit. And it just makes you realize how much you're just filling spaces. You don't need to take it with you.
You always end up having so much stuff that's like for a rainy day, but you never really use it. And after like a month or two of lugging a bunch of stuff around that you don't use, you're like, you know what, we don't even need this. My biggest problem is that as soon as we get rid of something, like 2 days later, I'm like, oh, I need that thing that we just barely got rid of. And like that's like my fear. That's why that's the root of my hoarderism.
Trent's got a little bit of a hoarder mentality going on. We're slowly breaking it.
I just hate to like get rid of something and then need it down the road, and it happens pretty frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Just in the van, it doesn't kind of just like force you to be a minimalist.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, sometimes it's like hard for people to be a minimalist if they're living in like a big space, but I feel like small living kind of just like forces you to be a minimalist.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Trent has a great quote that I always love. You think you own all of your things, but in reality, all of your things own you.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. I've heard that one.
And really, like, it's as you start to get rid of a lot of your stuff, you start to realize that like you didn't need all that stuff, and like it just clouds your head and your judgment. And when you start to like actually minimize, you can focus on different aspects of your life, and it really like changes the way you look at things. Even with like clothes, like we packed so many clothes into this van because we were like downsizing from a house, and I wear like a quarter of the clothes that I brought. And it's just like you just really don't need that much, but you always think you do.
One quote I just thought of that you guys might enjoy is love people and use things because the opposite never works.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true.
Yeah,
and that's another kind of unexpected benefit that living in a van has shown me is that I find so much more connection in the people that we meet and get to enjoy and really experience, as opposed to, burying myself in a phone or a TV show or watching movies. I'm now so much more connected to the world around me, I feel like. Just because there's less of a barrier with all of the things that I don't have with me anymore.
Yeah, do you find that, like, living in a van, you're just, like, outside more often, just to, like, kind of, like, forces you to, like, be outside and enjoy the outdoors?
Yeah, because you will get cabin fever if you just try to sit inside a van for multiple days in a row. Especially if it's, like, raining.
Yeah.
That's, like, when it's the worst, because you're just, like, kind of trapped. You either got to go get wet or go to a store or do something, or you got to hang out in the van, and, like, it gets to be a lot to sit in the van for an extended period of time. So whenever you're somewhere where there's outdoor activities and things you can be doing, it definitely urges you to get out there and enjoy what's outside.
People are always so surprised when they come into the van. They're like, oh, it's so small. How could you possibly live in this? But really, it's like, we live out of it. We don't live in it. So yeah, we sleep and cook and maybe do work here, but we live out in the world. And it really forces you, when you're in this small space, to go enjoy everything else outside.
Mm-hmm.
One thought I just had was, you said you tend to be, like, more social, like, get to know people more when you're, like, in the van. Something that, like, came to my mind was this thought that if someone's trying to get into van life, one of the reasons they might not is because they think that they can't have, like, a bunch of, like, hang out with a bunch of people in their van because it's so small. In reality, I just don't think that, I think you'd probably be more social living in a smaller space than you would, like, in a bigger space, because how you're just, like, always around people and everything.
Yeah, and you begin to, like, let go of a lot of the, like, social constructs of, like, having to get ready to go hang out with friends and sit in someone's front room, whereas, you might meet people at the park or in a parking lot or the grocery store, and maybe you end up at a campsite together, or you're hanging out, or maybe it's people you meet from online and you end up in the same place. There's a lot more opportunities to make friends and be social with people than a lot of people anticipate.
That being said, I would say one of the drawbacks, at least for me, is that it's a little bit harder to maintain your friendships and relationships with family or neighbors that you had originally before you moved into the van. And so for me, that's sort of translated into really focusing on those relationships in a more intentional way, in a less superficial way, because you don't see them as often. So it kind of makes those friendships and relationships more special, because when you're able to connect with that person, even if it's not as frequently as it used to be, it's a lot deeper, and you're able to really show them how much you care about them.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like when you're, like, constantly around someone, like, even if it's, like, family sometimes or just, like, friends, when you're, like, constantly around them, it kind of gets into, like, sometimes you, like, run out of things to say, and it kind of just becomes, like, a bunch of small talk, and it's not very valuable. But you guys found that, like, when you are, like, away from them, then the time that when you're with them, it's, like, that much more valuable.
Exactly. You just take them so much less for granted.
You appreciate it more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Another question I had was, how has living in the van helped you pursue your hobbies and, like, your passions more than it might have if you would have been living a sedentary lifestyle?
So I think one of the biggest things is that you plan your destinations or your next location that you're going to move to in the van, usually off of what you can do in that area. I mean, you might want to go someplace to, like, see a site or something like that, but for the most part for us, it's like we want to go here because of the mountain biking, or we want to go here because of the beach where we could surf, or our hobbies kind of draw us to certain locations. Whereas if we were, stationary in a house, you got to wait until you can go on vacation to go to any of those places. Whereas every day when we're done working, we can kind of punch out and step out into mountain bike paradise and go for a ride, So it really has opened a lot of doors and made the ease of access for a lot of our hobbies much greater.
We actually built out another van before the one that we're currently in, specifically with the intention of just using it for kind of weekend trips to go rock climbing. And we ended up taking like an 8-week-long vacation in it, where we were traveling all around the Pacific Northwest and Canada, rock climbing, and then also mountain biking, and just really fell in love with that freedom that comes with being able to wake up somewhere where you know there's going to be an amazing trail, or where there's this amazing rock climbing area. And that was really kind of the impetus for us to start transitioning into this full-time, so that we could really pursue those activities across the whole country.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's been great.
Did you find like a change in like your mindset or like your approach to travel? Because at least in my life, travel is kind of like you go on a vacation in the summer for like a week or two. How did your like mindset shift from vacationing to traveling full time?
It's a great question. I mean, I would say for me, it just takes so much more self-discipline, and it really forces you to be accountable to yourself and your own goals and your own schedule. Because it's really easy to get caught up in vacation mentality and kind of lose sight of, well, we're here for a purpose, and like, what is the meaning in this? And I'm not just here to flit around the country and just exist. I'm here to do something with purpose. So
well, you really have to draw the line between travel and vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, we travel full time, but we're not on vacation full time. So even though we're traveling and we're seeing new places and experiencing new things and kind of just going wherever our heart desires, we're not just there with no agenda and no responsibilities and just kind of there to absorb everything we can. We still have responsibilities that we have to undertake. So.
But that was definitely a huge learning curve for us, was trying to find that balance and figure out how to maintain a schedule and set a routine for ourselves in the van.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, I would say, like, it would be so hard for me to go back to a 9-to-5 in an office. Just now that we've experienced this flexibility and this freedom of kind of being your own boss and holding yourself accountable. It's pretty wonderful.
It's true.
I feel like when you're traveling full time, it's kind of about it's always about finding that balance of spending time outdoors in your surroundings, but then like working and following your passions and making an income, the practical aspects of being able to sustain yourself on the road. So
it's hard to find the balance, and especially with like making videos on YouTube, like it is a lot of our work is making these videos and editing them and getting them uploaded, and that's also like what we do for fun is a lot of the things that we're actually filming. So a lot of times those lines get really blurred, and it's hard to not just roll it all into one, and every time you're having fun you're like, oh no, I'm working. So it's like Allie said, you really have to kind of draw that line and set an agenda and a schedule for yourself, and then you got to be responsible enough to adhere to the schedule that you set for yourself. So finding the balance is probably one of the hardest things that we struggle with, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, no matter like what life or like what situation you're in, there's always that struggle to find balance.
Mm-hmm.
And
Definitely.
another question I had was like, where have you traveled to so far since you've been living in your van?
So we've pretty much stayed on the Pacific Northwest Canadian border on the western part of the United States, just because we really wanted to get in some great mountain biking before we head east for the rest of the year. And our home base is the Salt Lake City, Utah area, so this was kind of a short trip for us to make from Utah before we head east. We've had some really fun times along the Oregon coast and British Columbia. Where else have we gone recently? Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of great mountain biking, really fun swimming, whitewater rafting.
Yeah.
Great hiking, great views. Unfortunately, we're doing this right in the middle of fire season, so pretty much the past 2 whole months, the majority of the time, the skies have been completely smoky. It's like you're hacking up a pack full of cigarettes every day, just breathing in that cloudy air. So
it's crazy.
It's really crazy. I think, how many fires did you say there were in British Columbia?
550.
In just British Columbia. It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have this like fire radar app on our phones that we check, especially now that it's just been so bad, and pretty much the whole northwestern part of the United States is completely covered in fire.
Yeah.
So that's
Pretty wild.
It hasn't really stopped us from getting out there and doing our activities and adventuring every day, but it definitely, you start to feel it after a while. You start to feel it in your lungs. So we're hoping to escape that. Where are we going next?
We're going to be heading up to Montana and then Upper Peninsula of Michigan over to Toronto and then through New England and down the East Coast for fall, winter time.
Mm-hmm.
So just touring around the U.S. Have you guys ever? You said you went to Canada a little bit, but have you ever thought about traveling to different countries? And
Totally. Yeah, I think that's hugely on our radar. We would love to make that more possible. It's hard to. The one thing we are tethered to, I would say, is internet connectivity. Yep. And the ability to get reliable Wi-Fi. So we're starting to figure out some of those kinks so that we can be a little bit more flexible. South?
Yeah, I think Central and South America would be really cool to venture into with the van. So we might be, in the next year or two, maybe trying to plan some excursions that head down that direction.
Yeah, I'm just in high school right now, for those who don't know on the podcast, but yeah, for the at least the last 2 years, I've kind of been in that state of just looking into what I want to do with my life, and it's always led to traveling the world, and no matter if it's abroad or if it's just here in the US, but just constantly traveling and kind of getting out of my bubble here in central United States.
I'm such a firm believer that travel is its own education, and especially an education in yourself. And putting yourself in those vulnerable situations and in countries where they don't speak your language, and trying to take public transportation or negotiate with vendors is such a learning experience, and it's so humbling, and it just goes to help you understand how huge the world is and how much we really don't know. I think it's really easy to get caught up in thinking you know everything and getting comfortable and complacent, and travel erases all of that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point where if we kind of settle down in one place for a while, and we kind of to some extent, we kind of get stuck in one way of thinking and our same belief system. And I have the idea right now that travel will kind of remedy that and to help you give new perspectives and different ways of viewing the world.
Absolutely.
So we talked about this earlier. What's your guys' kind of thought processes with traveling to new locations? I know some people who have an income online where they display their travels. They set a certain amount of time they're going to be in each place. But for you guys, it sounds like you kind of just go with the flow. Am I right?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, if we like where we are and we don't feel like we've experienced that place to the fullest, then we'll try to hang out there and kind of explore more. But if we kind of get sick of a place, then it's really easy to pick up and just head on to a different area or a different location that might have something else we're interested in. So we just kind of follow our hearts for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, like Trent said earlier, we try to kind of plan our destinations around certain activities or sites that we want to go visit, things we want to do. But if we get caught in some little sleepy town in between that, where we are in our destination, we'll spend a day or two there if we end up really liking it, or if we like the people or the culture, or there's some great food we need to try. We're open to being flexible and kind of experiencing things as they come at us.
Sounds like you guys have a lot of freedom in the way you guys want to, how your life goes and kind of where you end up. In regards to freedom, a lot of people kind of don't go on this path because they're kind of tied down by a job, or they're kind of need that security of the job. How do you guys take the leap into working from the road, or sustaining yourself on the road rather than in one place?
I mean, I'm just a firm believer in the fact that everything usually works out. And if you are willing to just dive in head first and give it 100%, then it's almost impossible for you to fail. I think that probably 90% of the time failure is when you give up. And if you never give up, then you're not going to fail. So that's kind of the mindset that I've had taking on an endeavor like this, where most people think, oh, well, if you don't have a job, or you don't have this steady income, or you don't have a house to go back to, then how are you going to do X, Y, and Z? And that's just something that we've kind of vowed to figure out as we go. And if a problem comes up, we figure it out and kind of work out the kinks as we go, and hasn't failed us yet.
I would say that Trent is definitely more of a risk taker in our relationship, which is great, and he really pushes us to try new things and take a full leap of faith. And that I have been working toward going fully remote at my job for almost a year, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still working full time, actually, just fully remotely. I'm in healthcare quality improvement. And that was a whole negotiation process that took a lot of time and effort and energy, that I think is a good example or a good model for people to follow that are interested in living this remote or alternative lifestyle. So I was in a position that was completely in person, and really valued that in-person connection. And my company liked the work that I was doing. We had a great relationship, and I'd been there for a few years. So when I started the conversation with them of trying to move my position to a more remote position, it took a lot of time, but because of the relationship I had with them and because of my persistence, it ended up working out. And I think it just goes to show, like, anything is possible if you try. And ultimately, I knew in the end, like, I would value living in a van over this job. So I didn't really have anything to lose. And ultimately, they let me take my job on the road.
That's sweet. I've definitely heard of some examples like of people doing that before, where they, like, some people don't realize it, but it's possible to kind of work out how to live remotely. I mean, in our day and age now, everything is on the internet, and for most people it can't be too hard to or it might be like a tough process, but it's always possible to kind of transition that into the world of the internet rather than like going to and from one place.
If you can show to your company or whoever that you are able to provide value on the road, then I think anything is possible.
Yeah.
Another thing I was wondering about was I find that, like, living in one place, it kind of leads to routines and just doing the same thing every day. Do you guys, like, how has your lifestyle shaped, like, your routines? Like, have you guys, like, found new routines through the process of van life, and also, like, lost some routines and from when you guys lived a sedentary lifestyle?
There's definitely a lot of things that you lose. Obviously, you don't spend nearly as much time doing chores and things like that. There's no lawn to take care of, so I mean, cleaning the house takes 45 minutes, and that's like the whole house, where that takes like hours in a regular house.
That's like a deep clean.
That's a deep clean.
I mean, I think a regular clean takes 5 minutes.
Yeah. So it's like really like our morning routine is a little bit different. You know, we get up, Allie makes the bed, I make coffee, I make breakfast. And it wasn't necessarily that way when we lived in a house, but it's just kind of the roles that we've fallen into after being in the van. And being in such a small space, you are constantly in each other's bubble, so you really have to be cooperative and working as one. And if there's tasks that need done or need taken care of, you've either got to, tag team those tasks or cooperate with each other to, divide and conquer. So it's been a learning experience for sure, and probably a short learning experience, I would say. And I think we're a pretty well-oiled machine now.
Yeah, I mean, even little things like developing a new routine to brush your teeth. Like something you've been doing your entire life in a house, all of a sudden you have to completely redevelop that habit in a van. And it's just like those simple, mundane tasks that you want to develop, but really take a lot more intention in the van than they did in a house.
Awesome. A lot of times when I'm, like, thinking about kind of the societal norms around, I don't know if you want to say, like, going to college, getting a house, starting a family, or just, like, there's kind of like this societal norm around just buying a house, consumerism, and all of that. What was your guys' like approach to, like, minimalizing and decide to go against the grain and kind of question the norms? I mean, that's kind of a deep question, but
I think it's pretty easy to answer, honestly, because those social constructs are something that you've watched for people in our generation above us and maybe 2 generations past. And like you said, you go to school, you get a degree, you get a job, you buy a house, you have a family, you retire, then maybe you travel, and it's this big, linear path that everyone is, supposed to follow. And after seeing in my life, 5 or 10 people that midway through that path get in a car accident or die, or get cancer at the age of 30 and die, and they were climbing this staircase just so they could enjoy what's at the top. And you don't have to climb that staircase to enjoy what's at the top. Anybody can enjoy what's at the top at any point in life, and this alternative lifestyle really lets you enjoy the fruits of your labor without taking that social construct, that linear path that everyone else takes. And that was something that I think I kind of helped Allie, or helped convince Allie of early on, was that you don't have to go the same path as everybody else, and you can enjoy your life just as much, because nothing's promised. Tomorrow is not promised at all. Mm-hmm. So why not live the life that you want to live instead of living the life that society thinks that you should live?
And that's not to say we won't eventually have kids or buy a house or settle somewhere, but for now I feel like I would so much rather take advantage of my health and my abilities pushing myself, mountain biking or rock climbing or trail running, and traveling that way than I could when I'm 65 years old and retired. There's just no way I'm going to be able to mountain bike at the level I can now when I'm that age. And I just so much would rather take advantage of that right now.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people are that same way. They end up with disabilities by the time they're retired, and if you have a disability, you might still be able to see some parts of the country if you drive around, but like traveling in your prime is going to be entirely different than traveling with a disability, and we really want to enjoy our time in our prime. We don't want to spend our prime physical years in an office staring at a computer.
And I mean, the things that we do, especially mountain biking, make you so aware of how delicate life is. I mean, this past weekend, Trent was in a mountain biking race in Park City, Utah, and crashed pretty hard, which is pretty typical for when you're pushing yourself mountain biking, but just is another reminder of like, you only have one life to live. You have to enjoy it doing what you want, what makes you happy.
Yeah.
And just be grateful for that time that you have.
I would say it's valuable to think about it as kind of like inverse of how it is usually in society, because in like society we usually, or like the social norms is that you travel when you retire, and you travel like once you saved up all your money for the end of life. But it seems like your guys' lifestyle is kind of like inverting that flipping that on its side, and instead of you traveling in your prime years, and then maybe when you're older and you kind of have you kind of less apt to travel because you might have disabilities, or you're just older, then maybe during those years then you could settle down and enjoy life in one place. But it's awesome to see how what if we like value traveling earlier in our life rather than later.
Exactly.
And it's different. It's alternative, so it's often criticized about the norm as well. So anybody that's taken that regular path that I talked about before looks at what we're doing and is like, oh, you guys are cheating. That's wrong. You shouldn't do this because of this consequence. You shouldn't do that because of this consequence. And it's like, I know plenty of people that are almost in their 70s that are still working a full-time job because they can't actually retire. And it's like, the way the economy goes and things like that is a complete mystery. So if you like bank on the fact that you're going to be able to retire and travel and the economy tanks, you just worked all this time to just keep working when you get to that point. So it's like, why not take advantage of the opportunities we have now?
Not to say that we don't save and live very frugally, because we are still, working toward a comfortable future.
Yeah.
But we definitely take advantage of the present moment.
Yeah, definitely. I liked how you said, like, since you're like going against the grain, people will kind of like question your actions just because it's out of the norm. Like I heard this like great quote, because like college is kind of like just like the obvious path for everyone to take once you're out of high school. It's just you're expected to go to college. And when people kind of start questioning that, or just thinking about like alternative routes rather than immediately going to college, the quote is about, I can't remember it exactly, but it's about how like you'll get a bunch more questions about what if you fail, or what if things don't turn out than you would if you just went down the college route and then you end up failing. Because like when you go against those norms, people all of a sudden become like interested in your choices, and like asking like how you're doing what you're doing, and like what if you might fail and everything.
Right.
Yeah, it's so true.
So would you kind of say that your guys' traveling is kind of like a product of, it's kind of like cliche, but just like become so much overused, but kind of just to live in the present and to seize the day and everything?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's like Allie said, you've only got one life to live, and you got to get out there and live it, because 20, 30 years down the road, when you look back, you can't go back. You can't make different decisions. So it's like, if there's something you really want to do, you got to go out and do it, or you might not have that opportunity to in the future. Mm-hmm. And that's like really, I think, what drives us to live this lifestyle and to travel and all those things.
Yeah, and rather than saving it all for later and kind of just saving it all for the end, just realizing that right now is the most important and the most important moment to kind of do what you want to do in life, rather than saving it all for the end and for retirement. All right, I think that was about it. That's kind of the entirety of how we kind of plan this to go, but I don't know, do you guys have anything else to say, or anything else you want to talk about?
Just if there's anybody out there that's contemplating this lifestyle, or contemplating doing something that goes against societal norms,
go for it.
Just go for it. There's no easy way to say it, and there's no real way to prepare for it. You're gonna learn as you go, and the worst that can happen is you can fail, but you never know unless you try.
And it's going to be harder. It's always harder to go against the norm, but it's going to be so much more satisfying, and you're going to learn a lot more about yourself and what you're really capable of.
Yeah, definitely. I would say you'll regret it more at the end if you like don't do it, but you kind of just have to take that leap of faith and just go for it, and who knows how it's going to turn out, but at least you try to pursue a lifestyle that you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Trust yourself. Well, this was fun, Ethan.
Yeah, it's a good time, man.
It definitely was. That went pretty good for first interview.
Yeah, that was good.
Thank you guys all for listening to this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you'll head on over to Trent and Allie's YouTube and Instagram, both at Trent and Allie. And if you want to help support the show, there are a few ways to do so. You can head on over to iTunes or Google Play and leave a review. that would be much appreciated. Or you can go on over to patreon.com/becomeconscious. And on Patreon, I am focusing on making private podcasts just for that platform to anyone who wants to help support the show and get a few extra podcasts to listen to. So that would be truly amazing. Again, you can find the show notes, which I have links to Trent and Allie's YouTube and Instagram page at becomeconscious.org/BC3. Again, that's becomeconscious.org/BC3. Thank you guys all for listening, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode.